Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Let's go right on over to Florida State.
Yeah.
Florida State's over-under is 10.
Okay.
Florida State, to me, is the most interesting team, certainly the most interesting schedule in the ACC. And I've got a couple reasons for that. First and foremost, we have discussed at length, we will continue to do so, about the week 1 game, the banger game in Orlando, LSU, week 1. Kudos to both schools for scheduling it out. It has worked. Last season, obviously a 1-point win for Florida State. This season, who knows what the future holds for this series, but this will be a matchup very early on of two teams that I think they can contend for their conferences, for a playoff spot, maybe more. So I'm excited about that game. Everybody should be excited about that game. The other reason that I'm excited about the schedule and interested in it is because, you know, the joke about knowing what a team is by December on this show. Yeah. We're going to know what Florida State is by October because they play in the first couple weeks of the season, LSU week 1, Southern Miss and Boston College before they get to Clemson on the road in week 4. That will be a very big deal. That is the marquee game, I think, on this ACC slate. We will know who gets ACC bragging rights right away. Sure. Right away. By the time we get to October, we will know what Florida State's made of. But actually, for me, the devil is in the details of the schedule. The rest of the thing gets way easier for Florida State after their bye in week 5. And that's actually why I think I find it interesting, because the Florida State story now for the better part of a decade has been less about the games against Florida or Miami or even Clemson.
Right.
It's been more about those games against Wake Forest or Louisville or even Jacksonville friggin' State. These are the teams that Florida State should be, I've got quotes in, should be better than. And the Noles haven't been consistently better than those schools. Again, over the last decade or so. The Noles are going to have a run against teams like that. And how they navigate that second stretch of their schedule here, I think is going to tell us a lot about how this team has matured under Mike Norvell. There are landmines. They're at Pitt. They're home against Miami. They're at Florida. Maybe even a conversation at some point about the Syracuse and Duke games. But after that bye in week 5 and that initial stretch where I think we learn about a lot about the Noles, it's home against Virginia Tech, home against Syracuse, home against Duke, at Wake, at Pitt, home against Miami, home against Northern Alabama. They close things off on the road at Florida. That is a decidedly easier stretch. And if this team has blossomed the way apparently Vegas is expecting it's blossomed with a 10 over-under, they are counting those as wins. And sure. I'm not sure we're there yet with Florida State. I'm very high on the Noles, and I expect them to be solid the whole year through. We have seen this kind of building very slowly in the Mike Norvell era. But that, for me, will be the tell as to whether or not Florida State is there. They could lose to both Florida State and LSU, and I don't think that would necessarily
Florida
be...
and LSU.
Yeah, that would necessarily... Clemson and LSU, excuse me. I don't think that would be an indictment on where this team is at, because those are good teams. But if they go the rest of the way and they drop one to, say, Pitt on the road, Miami at home, Duke at home, that tells me that Florida State still has work to do.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I think that's all reasonable. I think that stretch, maybe not Virginia Tech that you mentioned, Syracuse, Duke, and then on the road against Wake and Pitt with Miami at the end of it before the buffer in Florida. I think that is the quality and bulk stretch. That we're not positive that those teams will roll over for Florida State or won't give Florida State much trouble. Florida State's more talented, should win. You know, that the twosome, we'll see what, I think it's Mitch Griffiths? Something like that? I forget. Yeah. This guy named Mitch is starting at Wake, I think, at quarterback.
Yeah, Mitch Griffiths, yep.
But that's been pretty plug and play offensively at Wake, and they've given a lot of teams trouble. They've beaten a lot of teams these past few years. We'll see with Phil Dracovic and Pitt, whatever, but it's a road game against, again, what we perceive to be a quality team that, yes, I think in most universe simulations, Florida State has a good time in that stretch. But I think there's quality and bulk right there, and that's what concerns me. And obviously, the headlining matchups are Clemson and LSU early on. I think they need to split that. I think splitting that is almost, and I understand both of them are not in Doak. One's in Orlando, right? LSU's in Orlando.
Yep.
Have to split. If I don't think it's, when you look at running through that 5 games, that tells us a lot about Florida State taking the next step. I think that's right. But Florida State doesn't measure themselves against those programs. It's LSU and Clemson.
Yeah.
They have to split. I think that's the determining factor. And
but that's why it's interesting. That's why this is interesting, because there's almost 2 ways to measure. You've got early on that measuring stick against the teams that we think are going to be elite this year in LSU and Clemson on the road, no less. But then as you get deeper into this thing, into the months of October and November, there are a lot of games that you look at from afar and you say, they could easily try to sleepwalk their way through these if they're not focused, if they're not up to speed. And I don't think they will. I like Florida State a lot.
Yeah.
But you could see it. You could see it on this schedule where it could be tougher than meets the eye.
Yeah, I'm going to say quality and bulk for those teams. I just think it's a given.
No.
You have to beat those teams. That is understood. That is verboten, that you have to beat all of those teams if you are going to be playoff-ish moving forward. It's the measuring stick games are just always going to be the best of the best, similarly talented teams in LSU and Clemson.